It started with a text message I wasn't supposed to see, and ended with a secret I never imagined my own son could keep from me. I know how that sounds. Believe me, if someone had told me this story a year ago, I would have raised my eyebrows and thought, what kind of messed up movie plot is this? But real life doesn't come with warning signs or background music. It just happens. Slowly at first. Then all at once. It wasn't the surprise he planned that shattered me, it was what it revealed. And the way it made me feel. I still can't explain it without my throat tightening up. It's been months now, and I still haven't fully recovered from it. It's funny how we think we know the people we love. We carry this image of them in our minds, flawless, pure, frozen in time. I thought I knew my son better than anyone. I raised him. I kissed every scraped knee. I stayed up with him through fevers and heartbreaks. I was there for every school project, every birthday, every broken promise his father left behind. I thought I knew him. But the truth is, sometimes people see you in ways you don't expect. Sometimes the love you pour into others starts to blur in their eyes, twisting into something you never asked for, never wanted. And sometimes, you're too lonely, too tired, too human to recognize the danger before it's too late. It didn't happen all at once. There wasn't this big dramatic moment where I suddenly realized something was off. No, it was slower, softer, like walking into the ocean one step at a time, thinking you're still safe. Until the ground disappears beneath you. I remember the exact day everything started to shift. Not because it felt dramatic or strange, but because it felt too normal. That's what still scares me. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and vanilla. I had just baked something, I don't even remember what now. The sun was coming through the blinds, catching the dust in the air, making it look like tiny stars floating in the light. He was sitting at the table, smiling at me. That smile he used to give me when he was 5 years old and wanted extra dessert. That was the smile that made my heart feel warm back then. But that day, something about it made me pause. Not because I thought anything inappropriate. Not at first. But because I realized it had been years, since anyone had looked at me like I mattered that much. Like I was seen. You know that feeling when someone makes you feel special? Not just appreciated, but like you're the only person in the world at that moment. Yeah, that kind of attention can be dangerous when you're lonely. When your marriage is long gone. When your reflection looks like a stranger. When your days blur into one another and your phone barely rings unless it's a spam call. I didn't ask for this. I didn't see it coming. And yet, somehow, I still blame myself. Because I let it get too close. Was it love? Guilt? Betrayal? I still don't know. I still wake up in the middle of the night wondering what exactly I missed. What I allowed. What part of me wanted to be wanted again, even if it came from the wrong person. This is the part of the story most people won't understand. But maybe you will. Maybe someone listening out there has been where I've been. Felt what I felt. That need to feel alive again. To be touched, heard, noticed. Even if the source of that attention makes you question everything you thought was right. So I'm telling this story not just to get it off my chest, but because I think secrets like these grow darker in silence. And I've been silent long enough. If you think you know what's coming next, you don't. Not even close. Subscribe if you believe the truth is always more complicated than it seems. Because this story is going to leave you breathless. And it's only just beginning. When my marriage ended, I didn't cry the way I thought I would. No screaming. No dramatic packing of bags. Just silence. A silence so loud it echoed through every hallway of the house. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, it settles into your bones. 23 years, gone with one sentence from him. I just don't feel it anymore. Like I was a phase. A season he'd outgrown. We signed the divorce papers on a Tuesday. It was raining, and I remember thinking how fitting that was. The world outside looked like how I felt inside, drenched, heavy, gray. After the split, he moved out of state. Barely calls. Doesn't check in on the kids. Doesn't ask how I'm doing. He found someone else younger, of course. And in the strangest way, that was a relief. At least now I had something to blame. Something concrete. But even after he left, I didn't feel free. I felt emptied, like a house that had been robbed. All the valuable parts of me, my self-worth, my energy, my joy were gone. I kept trying to hold it together. For appearances. For routine. But inside, I was unraveling thread by thread. And then there was my son. He's 27. Smart, warm-hearted. He looks so much like his father did when we first met, only softer. Kinder. He moved back into town after college. Said he wanted to be close to help. At first, I didn't question it. Honestly, I needed him. He helped around the house. Did my grocery shopping. Reminded me to eat when I forgot. Drove me to appointments when I didn't trust myself behind the wheel. He even started fixing things, creaky cabinets, old furniture. He said, "This house deserves better." And when he said it, sometimes I wondered if he meant me. It wasn't just what he did, it was how he did it. He looked at me like I mattered. Like I was more than a discarded woman. He called every night. Made me tea when I couldn't sleep. Held my hand in moments when I didn't even realize I needed comfort. And I let him. Because after everything I'd been through, I was tired. Tired of pretending I didn't miss being seen. Tired of carrying the weight of years spent unloved. Tired of waiting for someone to ask me, "How are you, really?" And mean it. And he did. He always asked. And I always answered. Maybe too honestly. Our bond grew tighter. At first, it felt normal. Natural. Like mother and son rediscovering closeness after years lost in the fog of a failing marriage. But soon, it started to feel different. There were moments I can't explain, glances that lasted a beat too long. Touches that lingered, just slightly. Conversations that felt too deep, too intense, for what they should have been. I'd laugh and he'd stare. Not in a way that made me uncomfortable. At least, not at first. It was admiration. Maybe even awe. And for a woman like me, divorced, discarded, invisible, that kind of attention felt intoxicating. Still, I kept brushing it off. Told myself I was imagining it. Told myself it was just a phase. That he was protective. That he was grieving too. You see, my son and I, we were both broken in different ways. He hated his father for how he treated me. Called him a coward. Said I deserved better. And every time he said that, something would flicker in his eyes. Something fierce. Something tender. He became my everything without me realizing it. My morning coffee. My late night call. My silent anchor. And the worst part? I didn't see the danger. Not because it wasn't there. But because I needed him. I needed someone to fill the space that had grown so hollow. Someone who saw me. Listened to me. Chose me. And I told myself it was fine. Because he was just being kind. Because this was what a good son does. Because I was lonely, not blind. But maybe I was. Maybe I didn't want to see what was really happening. My sister came by one afternoon. She was visiting from out of town, just for a weekend. And after dinner, while we were cleaning up, she said something that stopped me cold. "He looks at you funny," she said. I froze. "What do you mean?" I asked, playing dumb. She shrugged. "Just, like he's always watching you. Like he's worried." Or something else. I don't know. I laughed it off. Told her she was overthinking. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying her words. And suddenly, all those moments I had pushed aside came flooding back in full color. The way he stared when I wasn't looking. The way he stood too close in the kitchen. The way his voice softened when he called me beautiful on accident and quickly corrected himself to say, "You look beautiful today." And still, I said nothing. Because I didn't know what to do. Because I wasn't sure what was real anymore. Because part of me didn't want to know. You ever have someone become so essential to your survival that you stop questioning whether it's healthy? That was me. I was trying to rebuild a life that felt foreign. I was trying to be a whole person again, after years of being half of something broken. And my son, God help me, he made me feel whole again. But as you'll see, the closer we got, the more dangerous it became. Because attention, even the wrong kind, feels a lot like love when you're starved for it. And soon, that line between what was innocent and what wasn't started to blur in ways I never saw coming. And once the line blurred, There was no going back. The surprise he planned, it wasn't the gift that changed everything. It was what it uncovered. What it forced me to face. About him. And about me. And that's where everything started to unravel. It was a Thursday afternoon. I remember because the house was unusually quiet even for me. The kind of quiet that makes you hear every little sound. The soft hum of the refrigerator. The ticking of the kitchen clock. The low whoosh of the wind outside brushing against the window. I had just finished folding laundry, sitting on the couch, letting the warm scent of fresh clothes wrap around me like a blanket. For a brief moment, everything felt okay. Normal. Still. Until my phone buzzed. I wasn't even checking it intentionally. It was just there on the armrest beside me. But the screen lit up and the preview of a message flashed across the top. It was from a number I didn't recognize. But the message? Don't forget the reservation. She'll be so surprised. At first, I smiled. Thought maybe it was one of my friends or my sister planning something sweet. But then, I looked closer. That wasn't my phone. It was his. My son had left his phone at the house earlier that morning. He'd dropped by to bring groceries, made me coffee, stayed a little longer than usual. He said he had errands to run and left in a rush, forgetting it behind. So there I was, holding his phone, staring at that message. She'll be so surprised. Who was she? What reservation? And why did I feel this strange tug in my chest that I wanted it to be about me? My birthday wasn't for another 3 months. Mother's Day had passed. There was no reason for a surprise, not that I knew of. And yet, something about the way the message was worded, it made my stomach flutter. Not in excitement, but in a way that felt unsettling. I tried to shake it off. Told myself it was probably a friend or maybe even a girlfriend I didn't know about. But that idea stung in a way I didn't expect. Why did it bother me? Why did the thought of him planning something special for someone else feel like betrayal? That's when it hit me. I'd let myself get too close. Closer than a mother should be. Not in any physical way, not yet, but emotionally. Emotionally, I had crossed a line, and I hadn't even realized it until that moment. A few hours later, he came back to get his phone. He walked in smiling, easy, as if nothing in the world could touch him. He hugged me tight, the way he always did, lingering just a beat longer than necessary. And maybe I leaned into it more than I should have. I handed him his phone, casually asked, someone texted. About a reservation. Sounds like a nice surprise you're planning. His face changed. Just slightly. But I saw it. A flicker of hesitation. A faint flush in his cheeks. He laughed it off quickly, trying to sound casual. Oh, that. Yeah. You'll see. Then he kissed my forehead, and I swear, his lips stayed there just a second too long. That's when my heart started beating faster. Not in fear, but in something far more dangerous confusion. I watched him walk into the kitchen, pretending to check the fridge. But his body language, it was tense. Guarded. Like someone hiding a secret just under the surface. And suddenly, I was back in a moment from 2 weeks before. I'd bought a new dress. Just something simple I picked up on sale. Flattering but modest. I'd worn it to feel better about myself, to remember that I could still be a woman, not just a mom. He came over that afternoon, unannounced as always. I remember the way he looked at me when I opened the door. His eyes didn't scan me like a child admiring his mother. No, it was something else, something deeper. He said, "Wow, you look really beautiful today." And his voice, it cracked, just slightly. As if he wasn't prepared for how I looked. As if he wasn't prepared for how he felt seeing me like that. I laughed it off. Said something about needing to feel human again. And he smiled, but it was the kind of smile you give when you're hiding something behind your teeth. And now, holding that memory beside the text message, the pieces were starting to rearrange themselves in my mind. I told myself to stop overthinking. Told myself to get a grip. But a part of me was curious. Curious if he was hiding something. Curious if that surprise had anything to do with me. And worse, curious if a line was already being crossed in his heart. Or mine. I tried to go about the rest of the evening as normal. Made dinner. Cleaned up. Watched the same boring show I always do. But my thoughts kept circling back. Not just to the text message, but to all the little moments I had ignored. The time he brushed my hair out of my eyes and told me I deserved the world. The way he held my hand when I cried, like he was anchoring me, but also anchoring himself. The compliments. The glances. The "you're all I've got" moments that now sounded more complicated than they once had. The house felt colder that night. Lonelier. And for the first time since the divorce, I felt scared. Not of being alone, but of what I might be allowing. Of what I might be inviting without realizing it. Because when you're starved for love, even the wrong kind can feel like a lifeline. That text message, it wasn't the start. It was just the first crack in the wall I'd been building. And once it was there, everything started to seep through. And I began to wonder, what exactly was my son planning? And who exactly was the she he wanted to surprise? That night, I couldn't sleep. Again. I just laid there, staring at the ceiling in the dark, letting my thoughts spiral in circles that led nowhere good. The soft hum of the heater kicking on, the faint ticking of the clock on the nightstand, it all felt too loud in the silence. And the text message, it kept flashing in my mind like a warning light. She'll be so surprised. 3 words. That's all it took to unearth something inside me I didn't even know was buried that deep. I kept trying to convince myself it was nothing. Just a coincidence. An innocent message with a meaning I wasn't meant to understand. But the way he looked at me earlier, the way his voice tightened, the way he hugged me when he came in, so warm and full and lingering, there was something in that embrace that didn't feel like just a son showing love. And worse, something in me didn't pull away. I hated feeling so seen by him. And I hated that I didn't hate it. What kind of mother thinks like that? That question, it circled like a vulture over my conscience. But the truth? I was so tired of being invisible. After the divorce, it was like the world stopped looking at me. Friends changed. Invitations stopped. Conversations dried up. You don't realize how much of your identity gets wrapped up in being someone's wife, someone's partner, until that role is ripped from you, and suddenly, you're just there. Present, but unnoticed. And then came my son. This grown man, with kindness in his eyes and fire in his soul. He noticed me. He saw when I got my hair done. He complimented me when I wore a new sweater. He always asked how I was sleeping, eating, feeling. And when he looked at me, I felt alive again. I know how that sounds. It makes my stomach twist just to say it out loud. But if I'm going to tell the truth, I have to tell all of it. There's something dangerous about being lonely for too long. It dulls your instincts, blurs the lines you swore you'd never cross. I started thinking back to all the little things. Things I brushed off without much thought until now. Like the time I fell asleep on the couch and he tucked a blanket around me, his hand lingering on my shoulder just a moment too long. Or the time I broke down crying after seeing my ex's wedding photos online, and my son held me, his arms wrapped so tightly around me I could feel his heart pounding through his chest. Back then, I chalked it up to compassion, love, family. But now? Now I wasn't so sure. And that uncertainty? That doubt, it gnawed at me. Every time he smiled, I didn't know how to read it anymore. Was it pride? Care? Or something else? Something he didn't even realize was growing inside him. And what about me? What was wrong with me that part of me leaned into it? That part of me liked it? Was I imagining things? Making something out of nothing? Was I just so desperate to feel wanted that I mistook affection for attraction? I told myself, he's just affectionate. Always has been. He's just trying to fill the space his father left behind. He's only being this close because I'm all he has left. I'm just touch-starved. This isn't real. It's in my head. And yet, it felt real. Like static in the air right before a storm. That invisible pressure you can't see but feel in your chest. I started pulling away in small ways. Avoiding eye contact. Keeping our hugs short. Not letting him stay too long when he visited. But he noticed. One day, he asked, "Did I do something wrong?" And I couldn't answer. I just smiled and shook my head, lying through my teeth. Because how do you say, "No, it's not you. It's me." And I'm scared. Because I don't know where this road ends, but I know it can end well. I started questioning myself more than ever. Every move I made. Every word I said. Every look that passed between us. Was it innocent? Was it me misinterpreting his kindness? Or was something darker growing quietly between us? And still, underneath all the guilt and confusion, was that small, secret part of me that didn't want it to stop. That part of me that wanted to feel adored, even if it was wrong. That part that had forgotten what intimacy felt like. What warmth and attention and desire felt like. And here it was, being offered in quiet glances and soft gestures from the one person it never should have come from. I began avoiding mirrors. Because I couldn't look at myself without hearing the voice in my head whisper, "What kind of mother are you?" But then another voice, quieter, more dangerous, whispered back, "You're human." And that was the most terrifying part of all. Because if I could feel this, if I could want this, even for a fleeting moment, then maybe I wasn't the person I thought I was. Maybe I wasn't the victim in the story. Maybe I was part of the problem. And if that's true, where do you go from there? Because once you start questioning your own morality, once you feel that line blur, even just once, it never looks the same again. A few days passed. I did what I always do, smile through the ache, carry on like everything's fine, keep busy enough to ignore the voice in my head. But it never really went away, that whisper that something was changing between us. That feeling that I was on the edge of something I couldn't name. Then one evening, out of nowhere, he said it. "I want to take you out, Mom. Just us. Somewhere nice. You deserve a night where you don't have to think about anything." At first, I hesitated. It felt strange. But he was smiling so warmly, so innocently, like a child planning a surprise for his favorite person in the world. And maybe I wanted to believe it was just that. Maybe I needed to believe that. I asked, "What's the occasion?" He just shrugged. "Because you've done everything for everyone, and no one's done anything for you." There was something in his voice, gentle, sincere, but almost too intense. I felt it ripple under my skin. I nodded, trying to act casual, and said yes. A few days later, he texted me, "Wear that black dress, the one you wore on your birthday. You looked beautiful in it." I stared at the message longer than I should have. Beautiful. Not pretty, not nice. Beautiful. I stared at my reflection for what felt like forever before getting ready. My hands trembled slightly as I put on the dress. Hair curled softly around my shoulders. A touch of lipstick. Why was I trying so hard? I told myself it was just a nice dinner. A thank you. A chance to feel good for a change. That's all. But somewhere deep inside, I already knew this wasn't just dinner. When he picked me up, his eyes lit up like I was the most radiant thing he'd ever seen. He stared longer than usual, then caught himself and looked away. We drove in silence for a while. Comfortable, but heavy. Like something unsaid was sitting between us in the car. He took me to a small, intimate restaurant. Candlelit. Quiet music playing in the background. Tucked away in a part of town I hadn't been to in years. It was the kind of place couples go for anniversaries. For romance. The hostess asked, "Table for two," and he placed a hand lightly on my back as he nodded. A gentle touch, but again, it lingered. We were led to a corner table, dimly lit, far from everyone else. The kind of setting where even whispers felt intimate. I tried to breathe. I tried to keep it light. We ordered food. Wine. Talked about everything and nothing. He laughed at my stories. Watched me closely every time I smiled. I saw it again, that softness in his eyes. That way he looked at me, like I was precious. Then, in the middle of the meal, he reached across the table, took my hand in his, and said, "You really do look beautiful tonight." I froze. My breath caught. I told myself to pull my hand back. I didn't. His thumb gently traced the edge of my palm. I could feel my pulse thudding through my fingertips. I looked into his eyes and saw something I didn't want to admit. Something I should have never seen. He talked about his childhood then. About the nights he heard me crying in my room. How he used to sneak to my door, just to make sure I was still breathing. How he always promised himself that when he was grown, he'd take care of me. "You were the only one who ever made me feel safe," he said. "You were always there. Even when Dad wasn't." I smiled, but it trembled at the edges. My throat tightened as I remembered the pain of those years. The loneliness, the cold dinners, the arguments behind closed doors. He reached up and brushed a piece of hair behind my ear. A small gesture. So small, but not small enough to ignore. I pulled away gently and laughed it off. You always did have a way with words. But inside, I was spiraling. I wanted to scream. I wanted to leave. And yet, a part of me wanted to stay. Wanted to know what he would say next. Wanted to feel what I hadn't felt in years, seen, adored, wanted. And that's the part of this I'm most ashamed of. Not the moment itself, but that quiet, burning ache inside me that wished, just for a second, that this night didn't have to end. Then came the moment that split everything wide open. The waiter brought dessert, and as I reached for my fork, he said, "Wait. I have something for you first." He reached into his jacket pocket. His hands moved slowly, deliberately, like he'd been planning this for a while. And then, he placed a small box in front of me. Velvet. Elegant. He pushed it toward me and said quietly, "You don't have to open it now. But I want you to have it." My fingers hovered over the lid. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I looked up at him, searching his face for clues. He smiled, but it was nervous, unsure. I opened the box, and inside was something I never expected. I stared down at the box. It was beautiful. Deep navy velvet, perfectly square, lined with gold trim around the edges. My fingers trembled as I opened the lid, not knowing what I was expecting, but knowing somehow that this wasn't just a gift. Inside, nestled against black satin, was a necklace. Not flashy, not modern. It was old, antique. Delicate gold chain with a small oval locket etched in intricate detail. I recognized the design instantly. It belonged to my grandmother. My mother gave it to me when I got married. I hadn't seen it in over 2 decades. I gasped. How did you even find this?" His eyes locked onto mine. "I asked Aunt Linda. She kept it after you gave it to her during the move. Said she thought you didn't want it anymore." I couldn't speak. I was holding a piece of my past, a symbol of who I used to be before the marriage, before the heartbreak, before everything unraveled. And then he said it. Quietly, gently, but with such intensity that it sent a cold shiver down my spine. "You deserve to feel loved again." I looked up at him, and for the first time, I really saw it. The weight in his gaze. The way his lips parted as if he had more to say but couldn't. The tenderness in his expression that no longer felt like something a son should give his mother. Time stopped. The restaurant blurred around us. It was like the world had muted itself so this moment could live, alone, unchallenged, terrifying in its stillness. He reached for my hand again this time, slower, deliberate. "You've spent your whole life giving, Mom. Loving everyone else. And no one's ever loved you the way you deserve. Not even Dad. Not your friends. Not anyone." He leaned in. So close I could feel the warmth of his breath. So close I could count the flecks of gold in his eyes. His hands still holding mine tight, warm, trembling. My heart slammed in my chest. I was frozen. Not from fear. Not even from disgust. But from conflict. Because in that moment, a part of me didn't want to move. Didn't want to stop it. His face inched closer. Close enough that I could feel his hesitation. His hunger. Close enough that if I moved even slightly forward, our lips would meet. And still, I didn't move. Not forward. Not backward. Just still. Inside, my mind was screaming. "Stop this. This isn't right. He's your son." But my body didn't get the message. It was like I was split in two. The mother who knew this was wrong. And the woman who hadn't felt desired in years, whose heart was starved for warmth, whose skin ached to be touched. He reached up, fingertips grazing my cheek, soft and reverent, as though I were something fragile, holy. And that was the breaking point. I flinched, pulled back, sudden, sharp, like snapping out of a trance. I stood up so fast the chair behind me screeched against the floor. The restaurant seemed to come alive all at once, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of voices, the soft jazz music playing overhead. It all came rushing back. He blinked, stunned. Still seated. Still reaching toward the space I had just occupied. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. My chest was tight. My vision blurred at the edges. Shame flooded in like a rising tide. He looked up at me, eyes wide, voice cracking. I just wanted to make you feel special again. No one else ever has. That sentence. Those words. They shattered me. Because they were true. And they were wrong. And they were so deeply, heartbreakingly human. I turned and walked away. Each step felt heavy. Like walking through quicksand. I didn't wait for the check. I didn't care who was watching. I didn't care if he followed me or didn't. I just needed air. Outside, the night hit me hard. Cold wind, streetlights glowing yellow across the wet pavement, the smell of rain lingering in the air. I stood there, gripping my coat tighter, gasping like someone had just emerged from underwater. I had no name for what had just happened. No map for what came next. All I knew was, something inside me had been touched. Exposed. Lit on fire and left to burn. And now? Now I was standing in the middle of a life I didn't recognize anymore. Nothing would ever be the same. The drive home was a blur. I don't remember which roads I took or how long it took me to get there. I just remember my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that they ached for hours afterward. My jaw clenched. My heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. And when I walked through the front door, I locked it behind me, like I was trying to lock out the memory of what had just happened. But memories don't work that way. They seep in. They settle. They cling. I turned off my phone the moment I got home. I couldn't bear to see a message from him, or worse, hear his voice. I left it face down on the kitchen counter, screen black, like a stone I couldn't carry anymore. I stayed in bed the next day. Curtains drawn. No TV. No noise. Just me, buried beneath the covers, the necklace still sitting in the pocket of my coat like a weight I couldn't throw away yet. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, soft, vulnerable, full of something I hadn't wanted to acknowledge until it was too late. And the question kept repeating in my head, like a drumbeat. Did I let this happen? I avoided him. I didn't text back. Didn't answer the door when he knocked that night. I watched from the hallway as he stood there, shifting from foot to foot, shoulders slumped, holding a small paper bag. I don't know what was inside. Dinner, maybe. Or another gift. I never opened the door to find out. He stood there for a while. Then he slipped a note under the door. I picked it up hours later, when I was sure he was gone. It said, "I'm sorry. Please don't hate me. I didn't mean to cross a line. I just wanted you to feel loved." There it was again. That word, loved. But what kind of love was this? Was it misguided? Was it something deeper? Or was it just the brokenness in both of us manifesting in the worst possible way? I couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. Guilt consumed me, so thick it felt like drowning. And the more I thought about it, the more I began to unravel. I started replaying every moment, every hug, every compliment, every glance. Had I leaned in too long? Had I smiled in a way that opened a door I never meant to open? Had my own need to feel attractive, to feel wanted, somehow invited this? I told myself I was the parent. I was the adult. The line should have been crystal clear. But somewhere along the way, I'd blurred it. Or at the very least, I hadn't stopped it when I should have. And that truth crushed me. I sat at the kitchen table one morning, untouched tea growing cold in front of me, just staring at the wall. Hours passed, but I didn't move. Then my sister showed up. She'd been calling, and when I didn't answer, she came by unannounced. She does that sometimes. She says silence is a language of its own. She walked in, looked around at the dim, quiet house, and just said, "What happened?" I didn't answer. She sat across from me, not pushing, just watching. After a while, she leaned in and said something I'll never forget. "He looks at you like you're more than his mother. You notice that?" I felt something twist inside me. She didn't say it with judgment. She said it with knowing. Like she had seen something I hadn't wanted to see, or maybe something I had seen but refused to name. I didn't respond. I couldn't. She sighed, reached across the table, and held my hand. Whatever it is, just don't let it fester. Talk to someone. Talk to him. Pretending it didn't happen won't make it go away. But I couldn't talk. Not yet. I wasn't ready to confront what it meant, what it said about me, about him, about us. I went upstairs that night and cried harder than I have in years. And the worst part? It wasn't just because of what happened. It was because a part of me didn't want it to end. There. I said it. That's the truth that haunts me the most. Because for one night, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Seen. Wanted. Loved, however twisted that love might have been. And now? Now I couldn't unfeel it. I was trapped between two identities, the mother who was supposed to protect, guide, and set the line, and the woman who had forgotten what it felt like to be chosen. I didn't know who I was anymore. And honestly, I wasn't sure which version of me scared me more. I've always thought of myself as a good mother. Not perfect, God knows I made mistakes, but good. I showed up. I cared. I sacrificed. When their father pulled away, when he stopped showing up to school plays or forgot birthdays, I stayed. I did it all. The meals, the bills, the tears, the comforting words. I didn't always believe myself. So how did I get here? Now, every time I walk past a mirror, I don't see that woman anymore. The strong one. The dependable one. I see someone else entirely, someone fragile, hollow, ashamed. I sit with questions now. Heavy, uncomfortable questions that don't leave when I shut my eyes or try to distract myself. Did I fail as a mother? Or was I just a woman, tired, worn down, who reached for warmth in the one place it never should have come from? I keep going over that night again and again, searching for a moment where I could have stopped it. The moment the line could have been redrawn before it disappeared completely. But it didn't feel like one single moment. It felt like erosion. 1,000 small slips, smiles, touches, glances, that wore away at the boundary until we were standing on the edge of something unthinkable. Maybe I raised a boy who loved me too much. Or maybe my own heart was so empty it mistook comfort for connection. I never thought it could happen to me. Never imagined I could be the kind of woman who blurred those lines, even in my own mind. But when you go long enough without being loved, you start to question where love begins and ends. You start to crave anything that makes you feel whole, even if it comes wrapped in confusion and guilt. That night in the restaurant, when he said, "You deserve to feel loved again," I believed him. Not just because of the words, but because they came from the one person who had seen my pain up close. The only one who had stayed when everyone else walked away. And that made everything worse. Because the betrayal wasn't in a kiss that didn't happen. It was in the possibility of what could have happened, and the fact that I didn't stop it sooner. I haven't spoken to him since. He texted once more. A long message that I still haven't opened. I can't. Not yet. Every time I see his name on my screen, I feel the same sinking feeling in my chest. Like I've lost something precious and I don't know if I'll ever get it back. The necklace sits in my dresser drawer. Top right corner. Untouched. I haven't had the heart to throw it away. But I also can't wear it. Because every time I touch it, I hear his voice. You deserve to feel loved again. And I wonder, was that love? Or was it something else, something broken, misplaced, desperate? Sometimes I catch myself remembering the way he looked at me that night. Not with lust. Not even with desire. But with longing. And then I wonder which of us was more lost. Him, for giving too much of himself to someone he was never meant to love that way. Or me, for taking comfort in it. For not stopping it. For feeling a flicker of warmth in something I should have been repelled by. And the scariest part? A small, quiet part of me still aches for that warmth. I hate that part of myself. But I also understand her. She's the part that bore the weight of a loveless marriage. The part that cried silently in the shower at night. The part that went years without being held. Without being chosen. Without hearing the words, "You matter." Now, that part of me is still here, quieter, shamed, hiding. But not gone. And I don't know what to do with her. This story doesn't have a tidy ending. No moral wrapped in a vow. No dramatic confrontation. No neat resolution. Just silence. And a necklace in a drawer. And a woman trying to forgive herself for being human. I've shared more with you tonight than I ever thought I could. Not because I'm proud of it. Not because I'm ready for judgment. But because somewhere deep down, I think I needed to be heard. So now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt something you shouldn't have? Ever caught yourself in a moment, emotionally or otherwise, where the line blurred, even just for a second? How did you handle it? Did you walk away in time? Did you lose someone you loved? Or did you carry it quietly the way I have? I don't need sympathy. I'm not looking for pity, but I am looking for connection. Because I know I can't be the only one who's ever stood at the edge of a feeling they didn't know how to name. So tell me, was I wrong to let things get that far? Or was I just human? Let me know in the comments, please. Be kind. Be honest, but gentle. This story still haunts me. I relive it more often than I care to admit. And if you found pieces of yourself in any part of my journey, if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, messy, complicated, real stories, please don't forget to subscribe. Because this is just one chapter in a lifetime of learning how to live with the things we never expected to feel. Sometimes, love looks a lot like loneliness. It wears the same face, speaks the same language, wraps itself around you in moments of weakness and tells you it's something else. And sometimes, it's hard to know where the line is until you've already crossed it. We don't talk enough about what loneliness does to people, how it changes the way you see others, how it warps what you allow, what you crave. We talk about infidelity like it's only physical, but emotional betrayal, crossing that unspoken line, even in thought, that can be just as powerful, just as damaging, just as real. Be careful who you lean on when you're hurting. Not every shoulder is meant to catch your tears. And not every hug is safe just because it feels warm. I still love my son. That hasn't changed. But I don't know if things will ever be the same. I don't know if I'll ever be the same. The trust has shifted. The air between us, once easy, once natural, now feels heavy, like every word has to pass through a filter of shame and caution. I don't know if we'll find our way back. And maybe that's the price you pay when feelings cross into forbidden places. But here's what I do know. The real surprise. It wasn't in the box he gave me. It wasn't the necklace. It wasn't even the night at the restaurant. No. The real surprise was in the feelings I never thought I'd have to face. In the mirror I was forced to look into. In the version of myself I never imagined I'd meet. And now, all I can do is try to forgive that woman. Not excuse her, but understand her. Hold her with grace. Because sometimes the heart wanders, not because it's wicked, but because it's wounded. And all it wants is to feel whole again.